This is our van. We have exactly 2 months to convert it into our dream camper before we go travelling around the world. We have zero experience, a very tight deadline, and a delusional amount of confidence.
I'm a fucking plumber.
What could possibly go wrong? Things actually started pretty smoothly, as step 1 was just to strip it back to an empty metal box to see what we were working with. However, make no mistake, this is a make or break moment. If there's any major rust, it's game over. Whilst the van is only 4 years old, it has done 127,000 miles, so it's already lived a very full life. But as we unscrewed the ply lining and bolted out the bulkhead, we felt like pros. We were making fast progress, and after a quick scrub and a wire brush to the rust we did find, we realised we'd actually scored a van in great condition. So we were officially ahead of schedule. Now you can't just leave this exposed metal, well, exposed. So we treated it and added a coat of primer. Looking back though, we probably could have stopped here. The rust was gone. It had been treated and it wouldn't have come back. And most importantly, all of this red paint will end up under layers and layers of flooring and insulation eventually anyway. However, we did not have such wisdom yet, so we cracked on and added a white top coat to try and match the rest of the van and wiped out any time we had saved earlier in the process. Now it's crazy how early in the process you have to cut holes into the actual metal of the van, but if you want windows, a fan or solar panels, then you have no choice but to do it. We wanted 3 windows, and fortunately the jigsaw made light work of it. A word of advice though, always use protection. I spent the afternoon being burnt alive by a rain of white hot metal shards and they hurt. Do as I say, not as I do. With the metal panel now removed, we filed back the sharp cut edge and painted it so we were ready to install the window. We applied this thick rubber banding and then lathered on some weird black liquid before tackling the hardest part of the install, the glue. Now, I'm not sure if it was the brand or just me, but this stuff was the absolute hardest thing I've ever had to squeeze out of a tube, and it hurt so much. With the window put in place, it was left to dry overnight. Now, I'm not saying we did anything wrong, but all 3 windows did leak, so we did have to get the pros out to refit them for us. Do you know what's better than having 3 holes in the van? 4. And this next one is for a max fan. We built a wooden frame to give the fan something to screw into and used it to carefully locate where to install it between the ceiling ropes. We used a jigsaw again, but this time we taped a bin bag to the ceiling to catch the hot metal rain. To make it watertight, the internet swears by butyl tape, but honestly, we hated it. It felt like it stuck to us more than the actual van, so we slathered it in silicone and screwed down the fan frame. That said, we clearly did a better job with this, because unlike the windows, the fan didn't leak. That'll teach me for daring to question the internet. That same internet told us that Ford Transits are known to leak water through this plastic trim around the van. So, to finish off the waterproofing before the winter fully came in, we removed the trim and added, you guessed it, silicone to all of the clips. With the van finally sealed, we could move on to the much more interesting inside. Now, before we go haywire and start building things, let's just take a step back and take care of all of the fun stuff that goes on behind the walls, starting with sound deadening. You don't need 100% coverage with these, as the pads are only there to dampen the road vibrations by adding some weight to the metal panels. And with the pads installed, it was time to move on to insulation. We planned to camp in as low as -20 degrees, so it was vital not to mess this stage up. We ended up using 3 different layers of insulation, with the first being a thermoacoustic liner. This stuff is about 1 centimeter thick, and it works best with full coverage. Fortunately though, it's really easy to cut and mold around the weird surfaces of the van. And honestly, it absorbs so much sound, I actually don't know if the deadening pads are even needed. Just check out this before and after. For the second layer, we used insulation made from recycled bottles. You'll definitely want sharp scissors, but it's super soft to work with, and unlike fiberglass, it doesn't itch or destroy your lungs, so that's nice. This stuff doesn't hold water either, so we know it won't go mouldy from any condensation once the walls go up later on. We just needed to spray glue the panel and the insulation to make it stick, making sure we filled all of the cavities, including the cab liner and inside all of the metal ribs. This is super important because any gap is somewhere for heat to escape, and remember, we will be sleeping in minus 20 degrees. Now this installation phase felt like it went on forever, and we ended up using twice as many rolls as we planned. But hey, did I mention that it's soft? The final layer of insulation will be installed later, so for now it's time to move on and start working on the floor. Now here's a PSA for you. Vans do not have flat floors. I really don't know why all these ridges exist, but they do. So we needed to build a wooden frame to provide a flat surface for our subfloor. Once we had the layout, we marked how high the joist needed to be to finish flush with the insulation and started ripping down the wood. We probably should have done this first though, instead of cutting to length, because the joists ended up being ripped in roughly half, so we could have saved half the wood and half the money. But honestly, who's counting? After cutting the joists to fit the van grooves, we had to do a lot of very repetitive gluing and screwing. We joined all the joists into a single solid frame to keep everything level and prevent any future squeaking or movement. With the frame built, we glued it to the floor with yet more silicone and piled on every heavy object we could find to hold it down whilst it dried. Once dry, we slotted in our insulation and taped all of the joists to create a nice vapor barrier. You know, one of the hardest things about converting a van is that you think you can figure it out as you go and that it will all be fine in the end. But the reality is, you kinda need to know the full picture before you get started. Let me explain. Right now you can see us running conduit and cables for all of our electrics. But here's the problem. How do you know where to run the cables if you don't know where the outlets, light switches, lights, fans and fridge are all going to go? And how do you know where they're going to go if you don't know what your furniture layout is? But you can't finalise your furniture layout if you don't know where your electrical system or water tank is going. And you don't know where your electrical system or water tank is going if you don't know how big it needs to be. So, what devices will you be using every day? For how long? How much electricity do they use? AC or DC? How many of them will you be using at the same time? How often will you shower? For how long? And at what flow rate? What even is a flow rate? Oh, and don't forget about charging, because you wouldn't want to run out of battery and spoil your precious oat milk. So, how much solar power do you need? How much sunlight will it get every day? Is that winter or summer sun? Because apparently that matters. Will you wire them in parallel or in series? Do you need to charge while you're driving? Or will you be using campsites and need a hookup instead? And why, oh why can I not get this fucking cable in the hole? You get the point. It's so easy to drown in the details and never actually start, but trust me, with enough research, I promise you it's possible. If I managed to wrap my head around it with only a minor meltdown, anyone can. My biggest advice, simplify your build. Every build on YouTube can make you feel like you need to have all of the gadgets and gizmos, but realistically, you don't. There are a lot of nice to haves out there, but very few necessities. Right, I think it's about time we made some progress, don't you? After insulating the top of the door, we carpeted it to hide the cold metal and ran a piece of trim around the door with our best friend, silicone. The carpet is spray glued and it sticks immediately. It's a little bit stretchy, so you can mould it around the curve, but we still ended up with a bundle in one corner, which we cut as best we could. It's probably a lot easier if you took the door off and did it on the floor, but Seeing this come together as our first completely finished part of the van was so rewarding, and it was just in time because our flight to start travelling is edging ever closer. Now, remember that third layer of insulation? It's time. This is a simple reflective foil that will double up as a complete vapour barrier when it's done. To fit it, we made use of all of these holes around the van, which are the perfect size for something called a rib nut. I'll explain what they are later, but for now we added them to every hole we could find. Now, whether you actually need a vapour barrier is heavily debated in the van life community, as you can't realistically get 100% coverage, so what's the point? However, for us, it was cheap, very easy to install, and I figured 95% coverage sounds better than 0. Now, I'm sorry, is it just me, or does the van look like an epic spaceship right now? At this point, we were smacked in the face by reality as we accepted we wouldn't be hitting our end of year deadline. So we prioritised finishing off everything outside the van before putting it into storage for a few months. We already have the fan over the bed, but we were worried it wouldn't be enough to handle any cooking smells or bathroom steam. With limited roof space, we couldn't fit another big fan, but we did find these smaller exhaust fans instead. Now come on, I can't be the only one who thinks the fan is twerking right now, right? Right? After cutting the hole and screwing the fan in place, we realised I'd installed it too far to one side, so it was actually too tight on the inside. Good job, I didn't just say the van is going to be stored for the next few months. Outside, in British winter, with a bunch of extra holes now in the roof. Fortunately though, the second fan went much smoother and the water inlet didn't cause many problems either. So we could finally turn our attention to the solar panels. To plan the roof, we used cardboard templates based on solar panels we'd found online and rearranged them until we found something we were happy with. Now, I don't know if you've seen, but official van roof racks are ridiculously expensive, so we ended up using this incredibly cheap uni strut instead. It did need to be lifted so that the solar panels would clear the bend in the roof, but once it's bolted down, it isn't going anywhere. Now, there was something that felt incredibly wrong about installing solar panels in the pitch black freezing snow, but I still can't quite put my finger on it. Unfortunately, this was the last thing we managed to finish before our trip, and as we packed everything away, we realised we'd managed to convert this van from a big empty metal box into a big empty metal box. The carpet looks good though.
Bye, Vin.
Bye, Vin.
Now, whilst we were sad to say goodbye, working in this weather and around a full-time job was incredibly difficult. But it was now time to relax and enjoy some much-needed R&R, knowing when we return, it will be spring. The sun will be shining, the shorts will be out, and the progress will be fast and... oh, fuck. Looking back now, it's crazy to think how naive we were to believe that we could have completely finished this van in just 2 months with no experience and whilst working full-time jobs. Fortunately though, our trip this time was to go backpacking, so the van wasn't needed just yet. But as we unloaded to start working again, we hit a very real realisation. In exactly 3 months' time, this van is being shipped to Canada to start our adventure. We will be living in it whether it is ready or not. The clock is officially ticking. We wanted to escape the empty metal box as quickly as possible, and after an initial blip in the weather delaying our start, we battened the ceiling and walls, and this is where those riv nuts I mentioned earlier finally came in. You see, they have a thread inside, which means you can attach a bolt directly into them, and by bolting our wooden battens into these riv nuts and screwing the battens to each other, we are not only giving ourselves a surface to screw the walls, ceiling and furniture into, but we're also transferring the weight of everything to come into the metal chassis of the van, meaning the walls, ceiling and any furniture isn't going anywhere. A quick note on the ceiling though, if I were to do this again, I'd definitely run the boards across the width of the van instead of the length, as we ended up having these huge gaps to deal with. Luckily though, for this build it wasn't such a huge problem, as we do plan to add some strips to the ceiling at the end, which will completely cover this. For the walls, we used cardboard templates to try and match the contours of the van, but again, all of these gaps will eventually be hidden, so we weren't too worried about getting it perfect. The tape you can see was added to remind us where our battens are for attaching furniture to later, and right now we are using a router to cut out these storage bins. We cut part of the storage bin out and then added some wooden battens behind the wall. So when we finished routing, we were left with these super cool pockets for storage. Not gonna lie, that's probably the smartest thing we've done so far. And just like that, we have finally left the empty metal box stage and officially entered the empty wooden box one. Now, if you've been paying attention, you'll have noticed that this bulkhead has appeared out of nowhere. And I have a confession. We technically built it to this point back in the winter, but I wanted to show the full process at once, so let's quickly catch up. In all 7 initial designs, we did not have a bulkhead, and we really didn't want one. We wanted to have swivel seats in that stealth van feel, where we could have gone straight from driving the van into the living area. However, after seeing the insane prices of swivel seats and reading some horror stories about shipping vans overseas,
well, somebody stole our fridge.
we pivoted and came up with a design that included a bulkhead. Looking back now, this was such a great decision. It gave us security, a massive boost in insulation, and now we don't need to keep the floor space free. It gave us an extra wall for even more furniture to go. But to make sure we were never trapped, we added an emergency hatch so if things ever started to feel a little too sketchy, we could access the front of the van and drive away without ever having to open the side door. Now you're all caught up, we are so close to building furniture. All that stands between us and building a kitchen is putting the floor down and painting the ceiling. Surely nothing could go wrong. Now it takes a special level of fool to spill that much paint everywhere. You would certainly never catch me doing something so wrong. Moving on. For the flooring, we were lucky that our van came with a subfloor. So we used it as a massive template to trace onto some fresh new plywood before screwing it down to our frame. To finish it off, we spray glued this vinyl throughout the entire van, and finally, after months and months of hard work, we were officially ready to start building our home. Now we want a shower, kitchen, dining table, seating area, and a bed in here, along with enough space for all of our clothes. Now we started with the shower, using this metal shower tray as a guide so we could cut open our lovely new flooring and throw it away. In hindsight, I definitely didn't need to do this. But the shower tray was custom made by my brother-in-law and it fits perfectly. The wall itself was pretty simple to build, but we did need to cut the ceiling joist in multiple parts to allow for the curve. We left ourselves enough space to add the door in later and a couple of openings for inbuilt spice racks. For the furniture, we built our frames using the leftover strips of wood from the flooring. Although, looking back, we probably should have used solid sheets of plywood here as they are stronger and easier to keep square. But, as with most things in this build, we didn't know that at the time. On the plus side though, these frames are insanely light and we'll be wrapping them in thin 5mm plywood to save even more weight overall. It's crazy how quickly we went from staring at an empty metal box with so much work left to do to standing in something that actually felt like home. For the first time in a long time, we felt like we might just actually finish this thing in time. With just 6 weeks left, we set out to do some of the aesthetic touches to the van. We've always loved the look of wood slat ceilings, but when we went to buy the wood for it, it was going to cost over 250 quid. Absolutely no chance. So instead, we bought a single sheet of plywood for just 25 quid and cut the strips ourselves. Now we weren't too sure if staining plywood would even work, but the result was perfect. So after spending forever sanding and staining each strip, we attached them to the ceiling with glue and nails, and it looks so good. With the ceiling done, we added some paint to the walls and really started to get a feel of what this van is going to look like when it's done. Only I didn't just add paint to the walls. You see, when I went to shake the tin the following day, well, let's just say the lid wasn't on properly. What do you even do in this moment? I was literally covered from head to toe. This is my first ever facial and my headphones were ruined. The driveway was a disaster and the back of the van was a state. The only silver lining was when it finally dried, the paint peeled off the driveway with a giant satisfying peel. Moving on, we wanted to get the shower installed, mostly because we can't build anything else until it's done. Fortunately though, we made it really easy for ourselves and you can follow along at home with this simple, stress-free 19-step program. Step 1. Remove the shower wall you just built because the shower panels are absolutely massive and won't fit through the door. Next, drill a hole in the floor so that water can safely exit the vehicle. Make sure you've got these extra slots in the wall for the next piece of furniture to slot into and add noggins to later attach drawer sides. Connect your plumbing. These joints in the wall need to be tested now before they are hidden away forever to never be seen again.
Wow.
Step 5. Set up an electrician's dream right next to where you're about to test the water because nothing quite goes together like water and electricity. Successfully test the plumbing for no leaks.
I'm a fucking plumber. Shit one.
Time now to cut your shower panel to size using the plywood from the walls as templates. Just remember to flip the template if needed, else you will cut the panel the wrong way, which is definitely not something that I did or would do.
Salvageable?
With the panels cut, reinstall the plywood to hide the plumbing away for eternity and glue down the shower tray. For step 11, install the larger shower wall first and realise you have no way to clamp it in place. Step 12, wait 5 minutes thinking that will be enough time for the glue to dry. And then figure something else out. Install the next panel and reinstall the wall that was removed in step 1. I promise you we are nearly there. After installing the final 2 panels and inbuilt shelves, all that's left to do is wait a few weeks before siliconing the gaps and forgetting to film the shelf trim install. And there you have it. Enjoy your beautiful new shower. With the clock ticking, we were cooking on gas. Only we don't have a kitchen. Or gas. Let's fix that. Using the frame we cut earlier, we cut our worktop to size and made a large hole for the sink, which fit perfectly on the first try. I said it fit first try. I said first try. And with the hob in place, we could move on to the doors. It was around about now that I realised building the frames this way was going to cause a lot of problems later on and look ugly on the inside. But I also realised that maybe, just maybe, with some well-made doors, I could still hide this mess and it might just look good. I did completely forget to add a toe kick, but honestly, I actually think they turned out alright. All that was left to do was to add this backsplash, and these custom light switches were the ultimate chef's kiss. Now this tool cupboard didn't cause us too many problems at first, but we were now starting to see more and more issues with building the frames from stud wood instead of plywood. Just look at the size of those holes. All of these micro mistakes that didn't matter at the time were suddenly piling up fast and causing problem after problem, which really slowed us down.
You on backwards?
Dan?
Even down to the size of the plywood we used and the thickness of the buttons not being compatible. But we were in far too deep now and running out of time fast. It was all hands on deck, working 20-hour days and deep into the night to try and get this van finished on time. We spent a full day building a king-size sliding bed because I'm too tall to sleep sideways, and with just 3 days left before shipping, it was finally time for the electrics. We roughly laid out all of our components, marked where all of the cables would go, and held our breath. It all comes down to this. If the electrical system does not work, the trip is over. We do not have weeks to troubleshoot. We do not have time for any mistakes. This has to work. And so this was it. This was the state of the van when we shipped it to Canada. 5 months, 1,000 hours, and a lifetime of lessons. But we didn't make it. We didn't manage to finish the van before we left. We had no water, we had no gas, and we had no shower door. And these electrics were only switched on 3 days ago. I felt like a failure. I'd let not only myself down, but my girlfriend too. I'd spent months constantly reassuring her that everything was on track, and I believed what I was saying until the very end. Because things always work out in the end, right? What could possibly go wrong? I'd rejected help from family because I thought I could do it all myself. But the truth is, I couldn't. This project in this timescale was a stretch further than what I was currently capable of. I'd bitten off more than I could chew, and it was time to finally accept that. The journey we've been on to get this far, though, is unforgettable. Neither of us had any idea what we were doing, and honestly, my girlfriend hates DIY. But I can take nothing away from her. When she wasn't sleeping on the job or supervising, she was with me every step of the way. She saw things I didn't, and we would not have even made it this far without doing this together. Converting a van was always going to be stressful.
Stop! Stop!
But doing it alongside the person you'll be living in it with made it so much more fun every single day. But we were not done yet, because after a couple of weeks to come to terms with reality, we arrived in Canada. And it was go, go, go. The van arrived unscathed, so we immediately set up camp in a nearby site, ready to smash the rest of this build out in the next 4 days before our adventure finally begins. We connected the gas, installed the tap, and got to work finalizing the plumbing. We even had the shower door shipped to Canada, which arrived 8 centimeters too short, but after one final push to finalize the electrics, it was time to hit the road and finally give the big reveal.
Fucking sick.